Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll give it just a minute while our attendees start coming in to join us today. Everyone's trickling in. Hey, everyone, welcome. We're getting a bunch of people coming in. Going to give it just a minute. All right. We'll go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Tiffany Textor, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Discovering Your Authentic Self with DISC Profiles, which is hosted by Dr. Jay Pugh, our Vice President of New Horizons Center of Leadership and Development. And before I hand it over to Dr. Jay, wanted to let everyone know that throughout the session today, please use your Zoom platform to engage. Dr. Jay asks a lot of questions. He loves having interaction. So please ask questions throughout. Look real quick and find those thumbs up buttons. And then at the end of the session, we'll have a short Q&A period to answer any unanswered questions as well. So with that, I am excited to turn this over to Dr. Jay.
Hey, thank you so much, Tiffany, and welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Jay Pugh. I'm our Vice President for the Center for Leadership and Development with New Horizons. I have been in this space for quite a bit now, and so I really do enjoy teaching, writing, and really engaging with others in these proponents. So that's something I'm a super fan of. I want to spend a little bit of time with you all with DISC. We do have a full-blown dedicated course. We mainly do this in the dedicated event space. We don't typically do an open enrollment because many times when we do DISC, it's meant to be so that we can understand not only ourselves, but understand some of our teammates, our team members, the people we work for. And so we really try to make that pretty powerful. So in this case, I want to welcome you to DISC, and I love, if you can, to please go ahead and use the chat. Big fan of the chat feature. And so I have this question for you is, I want you to think for a moment of how you personally like to communicate with others. Do you like more brief, direct conversations? Do you like more open conversations? Do you like to save time and get to the point on things? Do you like to make time for others? I want you to think about what maybe your personal preferences are in the way that you communicate. What do you prefer in the way that you communicate? I always say, how do you like your communication? And go ahead and type those answers right in the chat. Oh, it's saying chat appears to be disabled. Okay, hold on one sec. What we can do is we can let that happen. In this case, if you would like to use the Q&A panel, go ahead and put those in there as well, and I can look that way, and I can start sharing. Here we go. I'm seeing that some like the brief and direct, and I have others. Some say I prefer open conversations. I prefer a little bit more kindness or a little bit more open. And sometimes it depends on the person. I saw Mallory mentions it depends on the person, and I really like that because sometimes that's the case. Man, really liking what's coming in. They're saying sometimes it's a little bit of both, depending on the topic and purpose. And we always sort of have these go-tos. I always say that if you could have it like Burger King, sometimes we like to have one or the other. We like to kind of focus if we had it our way. Like if it was like, well, if the world was exactly like me, where would that be? And so that's what I typically like to go into and really fully understand. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because as we communicate with others, what we have a tendency to find is that we have multiple behavioral styles that may exist. Now, with DISC, I have to stress this for everybody. You do not just fit in a box. I don't want you to, I think there's this big misnomer over the past sometimes with any sort of personality types, whether it's Myers-Briggs or DISCs or insights. What ends up happening is we feel like we have to be put into a box. It's not. It doesn't work that way with DISC. And they've really made some heavy, heavy adjustments over the past few years in the way that this works. And so I want to share a little bit more of this wheel with you in the way you can see this. Rather than thinking these as full-blown archetypes, I want us to think about things that are a little bit more blends or styles or sort of mixture of approaches. And I'll give an example here. My profile is DIC. Well, I have 3 out of 4. What does that even mean? Well, what that means is that you look at sort of where components are in your energy levels and where they fit. So for me, it is much more natural, and I do lead a little bit more D than anything else. Doesn't mean I'm only D. It doesn't mean that I am only assertive and dominant. We're going to talk about each of these behavioral styles, but I don't want us to come in thinking that, okay, well, we are just one of these. It doesn't quite work that way. We can fit into multiple boxes. So the way this wheel works is as follows. Number one, we have the D type of profile, and Ds are in this case to where these are known as dominant. These are dominant. This is people that like control and conversation. They are people that like to sort of, I don't want to say control the dialogue, but they really like to be able to share what they want to share, get to the point, and be assertive about the way they communicate. That is more of a D profile. They're known as direct or dominant. They're used in a couple different forms. The I profile is much more in the space where it's more about persuasiveness. This means that an I is for influential. It really is about more of motivation, persuasion, inspiration. That's where more of the I profile sits. So they might also want to keep things moving, but they'll do it in a very positive and motivational kind of way. The S side is steady, or also known as supportive. These are ones that are about kindness, empathy, support, understanding, really making sure that people are taken care of. And C's are conscientious, or also known as compliant. They are very analytical. They like to have more of a structure, a plan. They love organization. They like their 1s, 2s, and 3s. Now, as I mentioned, with this, it's not that one, right? It's not that we fall into one box or another. And that's why if we were looking, say, for instance, at a profile, where I actually fall in line is pretty close to the center, and I fall right about here. And so there is this blend. I do like things to move. I like things to have action. I like to be assertive, persuasive, and somewhat direct. At the same time, I don't mind being jovial or like being able to, communicate with some motivation or positivity sometimes. I like doing that too. What I really want us to start understanding is as we go through these styles, I want you to start thinking of not, yes, this is just me, but really understanding of, do I prefer this or do I not prefer this? Now, as we go through all 4 of these profile types, the one thing I have to understand is there is not one that's better than the others, other than D's. D's are the best. No, totally kidding. Not the case there. What I like to say, though, is that we have one that is, each one of these has great advantages and almost some cautionary tales to be aware of as we go through. So as you're looking at sort of this profile wheel to start, is there any sort of that stand out to you in the beginning where you're like, just by these words themselves, that you're like, yeah, do you know what? I like to think that I'm a little bit more assertive, or I like to think that I'm a little bit more analytical, or I like to think that I'm more in these places. And the chat is available now, just so you know. So you do have the chat feature now. It is up. Please feel free to type in the chat. Where do you kind of start to see yourself just at first glance? Will mentions SI, so true in the people space. That is I's and S's, very good. Intuitively was drawn to C, very good. SI, analytical and assertive, very good. Right in the middle, and yes, I love that. Very, very good. I absolutely love this, folks. And this is where I really like for us to understand is that we might fall into a few things. Now, with that said, I want us to think about this for a minute. Is there any one of these that you know that you're like, this is not quite where I'm most comfortable? And I will share mine. Ready? I don't want to sound mean when I say this. I do not have a lot of S tendencies. That is one place I'm not as comfortable with. I am not one that, as I like to say, I'm not a fuzzy soul. I'm not in that space. And I like that some of you are like, I'm not comfortable in S or I'm not comfortable in I. This is what I want you to start looking at in your own authenticity. And what we're going to talk about for the remainder of this webinar is really understanding what is it that we prefer and I love, Karen, you just said it and I appreciate it. I have to work hardest at S. And that's what we have to start looking at is I'm not comfortable with this, but I know there's work that goes into it. So what I'm going to give you is a few strategies today. And I'm going to teach you sort of, hey, if this is not a space you're super comfortable in, these are techniques that you can use. And I like that some are like ditto on a certain, right? Very, very good. I love this. First of all, totally digging the participation. You all are really on point with this. So thank you for that. And so in this case, I love, I love this. Oh, thank you. Yes. Good catch on that, Anna. Yep. A little bit of a typo on that. I appreciate that. And yes, is there a test for us C's that we notice? Yes, that is intentional. Yes. That analytical people, we intentionally spell that incorrectly. Yes. No, so that's why it's like C's are like melting right now, if that's the case. You might be a C. No. So in this case, what we're going to get into is we're going to start finding what sort of areas and strengths and what things we find with this. So I want us to start thinking with the dominant style, with D's, what are their areas of, and Amanda, we are going to answer this question. And a matter of fact, I'm going to ask us to hold that question and come back to this because the answer, we are going to really dive into that. And I love that you brought that up. And a question she asked was, is there a difference to be home and work? Yes, typically, but ultimately, the more authentic we become, the more we are who we are in both spaces. And I'll give an example. I used to think that because I am a little bit more D-driven and I-driven, that I had to be something else at work. And what I really learned was that I felt like I was hindering myself because of it. So there's a difference between being two different things versus I know I'm this and I know how to adapt to go to where other people are. And that's ultimately what we hope to achieve over time, Amanda. Does that answer your question? That's such a good question to ask too. So hopefully the goal is to unify. All right, so here's a question for you. Yes, and Agnesia, that is absolutely is that, yeah, as we have therapy, we gain more balance. And that's perfect. There are some that do just fully fit in the middle because they are balanced. They live in balance. And so that is a huge thing is that some people really value the balance. And that's what we're going to talk about as well. So I want to talk a little bit about each of these. What do we think for a D that the areas of strengths are? What do you think they provide that are really beneficial? Passion, absolutely. I would agree with that. They do like a good process. They are focused. They are quick. I will say this, and I don't want to mispronounce it. Is it mate? I please do not. I really do not like to mispronounce, but they are the most comfortable with change. D's thrive on change. They find a way to get it done. The thing that I always like to say is that, and they are confident. Yes, they have a natural confidence to them. The beauty of this with these is, and that's it. They know what they like, they know what they want, and so those are things. Now, my question is what do we think maybe their drawbacks might be? Yeah, they're blunt, honest. Yep, they like leadership. What do we think their maybe downfalls maybe or cautionary tales? Yeah, I might be a little too honest, a little too blunt, Rebecca. I can agree with that. There can be a sense of arrogance. There can be a sense of sometimes just being viewed as mean. They can be rigid. Sometimes they can lack a little bit of self-awareness. Sometimes they're a little black and white. They don't like emotion very often. And they can come off as a little bit of overpowering or aggressive. They do just kind of dive in. I will tell you as a D, and I'm going to share this more personally. I'm going to get a little bit more personal with you all. I am somebody that I don't like to have a lot of kumbaya sessions. I don't, it's not in my nature. I really like to be able to get to ones, twos, and threes. I know what I like, I know what I don't like, and that provides some advantages. But if I'm not conscientious of how other people communicate, I will fall into the trap of potentially not being open-minded. So that's why we have to practice these things. We have to be mindful of them. And so in this case, I am definitely in the space that if I live a little bit more in the D, I'm aware, and yes, patience, I'm not one that has a ton of patience, but I've learned to develop it. And that's where we have to be mindful of those things. So they are take charge, competitive, they're decisive, they're risk takers, they're fearless. I always say if the world was ruled by high Ds, everything and anything would get done. The problem is there would be casualties. And so that's why we really have to be mindful in this case, because what's hard for them is things that just are repetitive and they don't change. They don't like a lot of diplomacy because they think it takes a little bit too much time. They're not big on opening up because once again, they have business to take care of. They are a business mind first. So they might be more guarded in their communication. They might not share as much about families, or it may take them a little bit more to open up on those things. And they don't like rules because now you're limiting them, and they love a limitless approach. So those are things to be mindful of if you strive in the D. You know that you are very strong, assertive, confident, and they do. They believe. I like this with Agnieszka. I would say that they believe that if they have really done what they've done and they've done their diligence, they will fight and die on the hill for it. Yes. So those are things that are important. So that's the D style. Now, let's go over to eyes. Let's talk eyes for a minute. What are some key benefits for eyes? Influential. Yeah, they're motivating. Very, very true. They're very motivating. Remember, we're thinking influential, right? Yeah, they're great salespeople. They're likable. They are very likable people. They also have a passion. They like visual. They're social. They have charisma. Or as the young kids say, Riz. Sorry, that's my bad dad joke. That's sorry. Forgive me, please. But yes, no, that is. They have the Riz, as the younger ones like to say. Yes. They have that charisma. They do like to have inclusion. They are very big picture thinkers. Now, what are the areas of concern? What are their cautionary tales? Sometimes there can be a little bit of an inflation of ego. They can be impulsive, yes. There can be sometimes a lack of follow through. Sometimes they put so many things on their plate, they can't keep it all together. And there is absolutely, we teach a whole course on that, Misty, that there is an absolute difference between influence and manipulation. They can be in a place sometimes of a little bit of maybe the term sloppy, or the term maybe a little bit like not disorganized, but they move and they're agile. And so they might not be the most organized. Creative disorder, I see. Yeah, they love ideas, but sometimes they come up with so many ideas that we don't always get to action. And I would say the I's and the S's, definitely sometimes they want people to be happy and sometimes they hurt themselves to do so. And I's probably greatest challenges is routine. They do not like routine. So in this case, they inspire others. They're very positive, motivational. They are super big into promotion of ideas, opportunities. They're great coaches typically. The challenge is that they're not always the most organized. They have to be a little bit more focused in providing more details. And if you're a C in the room, what ends up happening is if I's are talking to C's may think that they're, I hate to use the term full of it, but they might think that there's some skepticism behind this. Like you're too pie in the sky. You might want to make sure you're coming down to reality a little bit. So that's just a little, once again, great advantages, also some cautionary tales to be mindful of. Wonderful job, folks. Loving this. All right, let's go to the S style, the steady style, the supportive style. Greatest areas of strength. Yeah, I will tell you, folks, they're like the great vanilla ice because they are the best at stopping, collaborating, and listening. You are absolutely right on that. They are amazing collaborators. They are extremely empathetic. They are patient. They are kind. They are supportive. They're high in emotional intelligence. They want to please and help. They are great active listeners. They are great at bringing people together. They are very, very good in this case. They do like a good process, Will, but the thing is what they want to make sure of is that everybody's okay with it. They are much more about the journey and not the destination. And they're big on consensus building. Absolutely. Yeah. They're very diplomatic, Derek. Yep. So, all right, what are S's cautionary tales? What's their areas they've got to look out for? Avoiding being too soft, maybe overextending. They struggle a little bit maybe with, and I'm going to say, Rebecca, sudden change. They're okay with change. They don't like sudden change. The biggest thing about this that is a cautionary tale is they put everybody else before them. Amanda, that is exactly right. They put everybody else first. And so self-care has to be really big with an S personality. And they may sometimes not want to rock the boat with people that are more D's and I's. So they will actually disengage sometimes. They take longer time to make decisions because they want people to be okay with it. I married an SC, by the way. I will tell you, and anytime, ready for this one? Have you ever asked your spouse what they want to eat for dinner? People that might have the S personality might be the ones that typically will say, whatever you want to eat. I want tacos. No, I don't think we should do tacos. Right? Somebody just said, do you really want to cause a fight with this? Right. But that ends up being with S's. It is with S's, they don't want to have to make quick decisions because that might cause a ruffle and change. So that's where we have to be mindful of. And so you're absolutely right in this case is that they are big in harmony. They are friendly. They're sensitive. They're amazing listeners. They're big on being kind and cooperative and collaborative. What's hard for them is anything that requires competition. They don't like to voice contrary opinions. They don't necessarily like conflict. And they are hesitant in making change because they don't like to ruffle feathers. They want to make sure everybody's on board before we do something. And sometimes we have to pull the trigger on decisions. Excellent. All right, we got one more to dive into. Let's talk C's for a second. Let's talk C's. What are their biggest areas of strength? They are very big on research and problem solving. They pride knowledge. They are extremely detail oriented. I really like this. They love a good process. They are accurate. They really believe in accuracy. Anything else? Anything else? There's one or two more in there. What else? Yep. Thank you, Rebecca. They are very big in fairness And Sandra, absolutely, they're analytical. Tom, they are planners. They want a full-based plan. They come prepared. And they consider a lot of ideas before making a decision. Now, what is the cautionary tale for the C? Analysis paralysis, Paul. You couldn't be more right. They do. They sometimes get stuck in rules. They get stuck in indecisiveness. Sometimes they might be overly detailed and they will communicate in details, and not being unkind with this, but sometimes they may end up boring their audience with the details that they didn't ask for. And they have a tendency to maybe overthink. They might take a little too long to decide. Those are cautionary tales we have to. And Anna, that is a really, really big thing, is C's typically enjoy perfectionism. Because they love accuracy. And so sometimes they will not pull the trigger on a decision because I need to make sure it's perfect before we move. So those are cautionary tales there as well. And so exactly, folks, they plan spontaneity. My wife knows that I have a little bit of a C side to me, and she's like, you plan your plans. You plan when you're making your plans. And it's pretty on point there. They are quick to think. A huge advantage is that they're very quick to think, but they're slow to speak. They like to gather first before hopping in. They meet specified expectations. They want to make sure I will tell you that C's, if you set the timeline, they will adhere to said timeline. They are uncomfortable with disorganization, though. So if you're somebody that likes change and movement and chaos, C's get uncomfortable with it. And I don't want to say that they're not flexible. They can be flexible, but if there's flexibility, they need to have reasoning behind the flexibility. They are the most guarded of personalities in terms of opening up right away to people. They're not going to tell you their life story. They're not going to be an open book to start. They're going to be a little bit more sitting back, gathering a little bit. They do like to work with others. They like to make sure that, though, if we are going to work on this, can we at least have a consistent process in the way we do things? The thing that is most uncomfortable to C's is incompletion. And Paul, you mentioned a question that says, are they the type to let perfect be the enemy of good? Yes, it really is. Good is not enough for the C personality, because we can make this more accurate. We can make this a better workflow. So that is a fantastic question from Paul. All right. So here's what I want to go back to for a moment. And I want to tie this back to a little bit of how we tie this into DISC. So as we tie this back, I want you to think of what factors are out there to help us determine how others communicate. How can we read other people, not just knowing our own selves? How can we start reading others, and how can we use that information to better communicate with them? How can we pick up on clues and cues? What kind of things can we really use in our mindfulness? Very good, Amanda. I really like this. If it's detailed, if it's ready for this, yes, Catherine, we need to ask questions. You are 100% right. Agnieszka mentions, hey, we want to make sure that we're really listening to phrases they're using. And I will tell you, there's quick ways to indicate and tell whether or not they're on one end or another. I'll give you one little, yep, body language, tone, yep. That's exactly right. The speed in which they hop into something. Do they seek clarification? Are they stories or facts? This is brilliant stuff, folks. This is what we're looking for. I love what I'm seeing here. And do they like small talk or not? I's and S's will like small talk. D's and C's will not. So those are things to consider. So here's what we're going to go to, and here's some quick indications on things you can tell to read people a little bit sooner and a little bit faster. Ready? Here's the fun parts. The first thing that we pay attention to is speed. The speed in which people move or want to move will tell you how comfortable they are. And here's the thing. If they are more direct, if they are more let's move, they are going to be a little bit more in the D and I space. They're going to be more in the D and I. D's and I's like action, speed, movement. Let's go. And I will tell you, folks, my first two letters that I'm most comfortable with are D and I. And it is so true because I really do have a motto that if I'm not moving, I'm dying. So I need you to move. I can be direct with it. I can like to be jovial and sometimes humorous with it, but I do want movement. And the S's and C's really want you to pump their brakes. They want to slow down and think about this. They want to make sure people are okay with this. Give me time to process the information and see what it looks like. So what the first thing we pay attention to in dialogue with this is, ready for this? How many of you know somebody that interrupts you mid-dialogue? Like they're in with you and they'll talk with you as you're communicating. Anybody ever know somebody like that? And good. Yes. And I like that some of you are like, yes, that's me. Yeah, that's perfect. That's what we're looking for here. And that's the thing is that that's where people are like, and I'm somebody that I'm with you. So I'm in the dialogue with you. So I'll like hop in and talk to you with you. Whereas S's and C's won't say a word. They'll demonstrate more body language. They'll sit back, they'll head nod, they'll sort of move their head a little bit and they'll sort of, furrow eyebrows if they're thinking, but they'll sit back and they'll take it all in. So they will never interrupt. And not only will they not interrupt, what they'll also do is they will wait. They will absolutely wait. So a key tool that if you know somebody that's a little bit more pump your brakes, one of the greatest tools I've ever used is silence. I will ask a question and then I will not be the next to speak. I will stay quiet and I will let discomfort appear because by then they are processing their answer. So I want you to think, how many of you ask a question and then after about 4 or 5 seconds, you want to clarify? How many of you sit there? I used to do this. Some of you are like, Dr. Jake, please get the heck out of my head. I understand. So I used to be that way. And then what I learned was if I was somebody that would ask a question, and then I clarified the question, S's and C's would start all over in their process. So I wasn't giving them time to process and respond. So believe it or not, I've gotten comfortable with the 10-second. I will wait up to 10 seconds for somebody to hop in. And the reason why I do that is because I want to give room for the S's and C's to process, understand, and answer in a diligent manner. Whereas if I'm speaking more to D's and I's, it's going to feel like ping pong, rapid fire, back and forth. It's going to move more in that space. So the first thing we have to look at is, from a speed perspective, how quick do they move in conversation? Other things to consider, and this is not necessarily a true correlation, but there is a tendency, there's a relative correlation to this. D's and I's have a little bit more extroversion. Yeah, Michelle, good point, right? And I will tell you, for me, everything feels life and death. And once again, I'm a little bit more of a higher DI, so everything feels like it's the most important thing that we can do. So that's and once again, if you're more like it depends, right? That's like a huge thing. And you're right, husbands are D. They want to share what they're going to share, and then they will say what questions you have. So D's and I's have a little bit more extroversion. They love action, and they truly, truly love change. So the further they're on this end, they really want to dive in, get to work, create change. Versus the other side, which is going to be much more of methodology. They want to know the methods. They want to observe, and they rely on perception. They want to be able to perceive, they want to be able to observe, they want to be able to gather, so they do sit back. And there's a little bit more introversion with something with a little bit more S and C. That's the first way that I pay attention to speed in this, or I pay attention to where people may fall at. Next, the second thing is how open or closed they are with personalized conversations. And what this means is that if they are keep it close to the vest, they're a little bit more guarded, they don't openly share about their personal life or things like that, they're going to be a little bit more towards the D and C area, because it's really about GSD mode. Anybody know what GSD stands for? Getting stuff done. Exactly right. Get stuff done. GSD is get stuff done. They want to get stuff done. So for them, it's very much business first mentality. So if you notice people talk business first, here's a key indication. The next meeting you have, see the ones that want to hop right in versus the ones that go, hey, how you been? What's happening? How was your weekend? Those are going to be much more in the space of the I's and S's. The I's and S's are going to be much more in the space of sharing is caring. They are people-y people. They really want to know, how are you? How was your weekend? I always say there's the people that are the how was your weekend people, and there's the people that do not want to know how your weekend was, and they don't want to share how theirs was either. And then there's some that might be a little indifferent. But D's and C's keep their personal stuff a little bit more close to the vest. I's and S's, much more open. So see how open they are in the way that they communicate. Now, who are my ones that are a little bit more in the space of the I'm an open book. I am very people oriented. I will absolutely ask how weekends were. Sharing is caring. Wonderful. Wonderful. I want us to have some ownership in that. I love that. Good. How many of you are, let's get to business? We like GSD. Who are my GSDers? Get stuff done. Very, very good. And so this is where this communication factor starts to come in. And I like where we may say, I'm a little bit in the middle. That's perfectly okay. That's what these assessments do, is that you may find yourself saying, you know what, I'm a little bit more, and I'll give an example. When it comes to open versus guarded, I'm a little bit more central in that space. I'm okay with both. I typically won't ask, but if you ask me, I will go into it with you, and then I will ask you. I'm a little bit in the middle there. However, I am somebody that I want to move. I want to move. That's the D and I side. Let me move. And this is what I really, folks, what I love that you're doing right here, and this means the world, is you're gaining that self-reflection in the way you communicate. And then for other people, you're starting to see the way other people like to communicate as well. This is why I love doing this. So I really love this feedback in the chat coming into. And I agree with Vernon and Agneskia, is that yes, our characters shape us. Our life experience shapes us. So sometimes it can be based on upbringing. It can be based on our culture a little bit. It really does live within us in our lived experiences. Another question I typically get is, does this change over time? And the answer to this is Absolutely, it does. Absolutely. I always say that if you haven't taken a DISC assessment in the last 2 to 3 years, take it again. And the reason why is because that, Sarah, look at you all are leading this. You don't even need me anymore. This is perfect. You're right. We might have moved. And if we've moved to another location that might be a little bit more slow down, not as fast paced, then all of a sudden that may shift our lifestyle. For other cases, it might, and I'll be honest with you, you would think that, and I shared this in a slide, but I didn't get a chance to talk about this. I'm a dad of 4 girls. And I know that that's going to be the shot of, I've felt some reactions behind the scenes there. I have 4 daughters, and you would think with 4 girls that I might be a little bit more I and S driven. It's actually the other way. Because my wife is in a space of being S and C, she's supportive, she's conscientious, she listens, she's an amazing listener. I don't quite have to be that for them. So I'm not the dad that's like, I have 4 princesses. I have 4 independent queens. You don't need anybody to make things happen for yourself. You are strong, independent ladies. Like, that's where I live. And my wife's like, yes, but we are going to love you every step of the way. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to do that too. Absolutely. And so it's important to know yourself, and it's really important to start paying attention to others. Oh, absolutely, Natalie. I live in a world of women, believe you me. And so in this case, but what I found is that each of my daughters too have their own sort of personalities. One of my daughters is a lot like me, wants movement, wants action, let's get to it. Another one is much more like my wife. And there's some that have different, little bit of differences in between. What we have to really be conscientious of, and this is going to be one of the last things I'm going to teach you before we end up going to Q&A. I always say, how do you know if you're hitting your targets if you don't know where you're standing? And so I like to look where I am first, know that I'm a little bit more D and I driven with some C tendencies. And then I look across and I go, all right, if I'm meeting you where you are, how can I do that? And I want to look to see how I can meet people where they are. So if I do work with somebody that's more S and C driven, I slow down, I listen, I give my whole body to communication, and I will speak less and listen more. Now, the other thing is that you are allowed to be kind in your transparency. And you are allowed to share what you prefer in your communication too. And I do that with a lot of people. I always say, listen, I am somebody that I move at the speed of light. So please email me if you need something because I don't want to lose track of it. If you Teams message me something, I may not get to it right away because I am so in motion. So I like to share that too, is that if you need something from me, I think it's okay to share and be kind and transparency as well. So that's where we fall on this scale with DISC. So now that we've learned this really intently, how many of you, number one, have at least a general sense on where you fit within the DISC wheel? Oh, a lot of hand raisers, loving this. Okay, very, very good. Wonderful. Excellent. What I will say too is, like I say, we do full workshops with these. We really go through team development with these, with leaders and their teams. The other thing is that we do have the assessments themselves. So if you're interested and you're like, hey, I'd really like to take this DISC assessment, I'd really like to see where I'm sitting in this, I'm going to say, please make sure that on that 1-question survey at the end that's going to be sent out by our marketing team, if you'd like to know more, just say yes and somebody will reach out. We'd be happy to see what we can do for you. Now, with that said, I want to leave this time for you and questions. What questions do we have? And Natalie, what I'll do is I'll have marketing see about this. I just want to kind of come to this a little bit. So, And John, I'm going to let marketing speak on behalf of things of that nature. Are there books that go over this material? There are plenty. I would say that, like I said, there's other groups that do this. Wiley and Sons was one of the originators. I'm, Tom, one thing that I really focus on when it comes to material on this is the more that you spend with the assessments themselves, the reports you will get out of them will give you 30, 40 pages of true understanding and strategy that comes with it. And mate, you mentioned what's the best way to communicate to whole teams with different personalities. So if, mate, there's a webinar I recently did and a course and a book that I've written focused on mastering meaningful engagement. And we talk about how to build the 4 square of content to make sure that you're covering all 4 components. That is a really, really big thing that we really spend time with, is we focus on the 4 square. So we have another course that we have called Mastering Meaningful Engagement. It's based on a book that I wrote called Conquering the 7 C's. And it really is about how do you make sure you're engaging your whole audience while making sure you're connecting to every individual. When you have to reach someone to someone you don't know, is it better to be reserved at first until you get to know them? I always say, Amanda, let them lead. Let them lead. And what I mean by that is ask them a question, ask them a thought-provoking question, and see how long it takes them to process and answer the information. And then on top of that, what I have a tendency to do is I then read and then I start to move with their speed, or I start to open up a little bit more, or if they're a little bit more guarded, I don't push that envelope with them. And just in case, the book is Conquering the 7 C's. It is a book driven much more around teaching, but I will tell you that I think in any parts of our lives as leaders, we are teachers. Other questions that we have? And that course that ties with it is called Mastering Meaningful Engagement. I did get a separate question in the Q&A on that. Mastering Meaningful Engagement is the name of that course. And Agnieszka, we don't have to like really, yeah, sometimes yeah, it's once again, that's why we talked about true kindness and transparency. And that's where I think we can model. I think we can model that. Yep, there it is. How do you handle 2D personalities in the same room? What I typically do is I go Venn diagram, meaning that I want to hear what person A has to focus on. I want to focus on what person B wants to focus on. That I let each of them have their room and space to communicate without interruption, and then we merge, find the ideas that we work in together. That's typically one of the best ways I've learned to have 2 Ds in a room. How does DISC tie into leadership styles? Servant leaderships drive a little bit more S. Coaching leadership is a little bit more I. Command and control is a little bit more D. And I don't want to say laissez-faire, but it's really more divide and conquer type leadership is a little bit more C. Everybody has roles and responsibilities where it's going to be. That's another really good question. It's impossible to make everyone happy. Yeah, it is. And the goal is not to make everybody happy. The goal is to use this to create win-win scenarios. That's really where I use this. And I just want to make sure I wasn't missing questions. Okay. Are there positive reinforcement methods that fit each of the individual types? Yeah, in the workshop we do, Misty, there are. I know I wish I could be able to explain them in 5 to 10 minutes, but I know that in our courses, we absolutely go through those. Just a couple little quick answers that I can provide. Positive reinforcement methods with Ds. I don't want to say feed the ego because they don't want to sift through that, but really what they want is save them time. Tell them how you've saved them time. That is important to them. I's, share a story with them. Be personable with them. They want to see you share your stories, and they want to be able to share their stories with you. So let I's talk. S's, let them share. And what I mean by share is create opportunities for collaboration, for catch-ups, for really just, I want to spend time with you. Let's put work aside for a moment. They are the most human-driven styles that are there. If they don't know you as a person, they don't want to connect to you. And for the C's, lead with numbers and steps. Make things chronological in communication. Here's where we were, here's where we are now, here's where we would like to be. As an SI dealing with a very heavy D personality, any advice on how to approach that you may come up? Jackie, the best advice I can honestly give is take nothing personally. And I know that's so hard for S's and I's. I know it is. D's are not, once again, they can come off brash, they can come off abrasive. What I typically will say is that with D's, take nothing personally. What I always say is lean into the problem. So attack the problem. So if they're like, I don't like what you did with this project, you know what then? Let's dive into the project. I want to dive into the project with you. Let's do it. Yeah, Q-tip. I love that, Makita. With I's and S's, and if you're working with more D's and C's, it's nothing personal. It's never personal. With S's and C's that are indecisive, what is the best way to take the lead and not feel like they have to? What I typically do is I like to lead with options, and I like to give them timelines. Do not ever expect an answer right then and there. I never pressure C's to decide right then and there. What I typically do is I say, here's down to the last 2 or 3 options I think we're at. Please take a look at them. If you can let me know by Friday, that would be meaningful. What they will then do is they will orchestrate and organize to make sure they hit that deadline for you. So lead them with timelines. Another great question. See some similarities describing 6. Yeah, so I think so. I think that there's a little bit more nuances to the process communication model. I think there's a few more nuances. What I really like about DISC is that DISC is a little bit more fluid, that we don't have to fit in one necessary box, that we can have blends and approaches in the way that we move. So that's just my only, once again, that's just my 2 cents on that, Julian. I think one is better, that if you're trying to have an archetypal profile, then I would go process communication model. If you're really trying to focus on the blends and the understandings, go with DISC. Really amazing questions. I just absolutely love the engagement today from you all. I really appreciate it. Like I said, if you are interested in any of this, like I said, there's just a little 1 question survey. I will let Tiffany reach out on that one. And so with that said, I'm going to pass it back over to Tiffany. Thank you all so much. Please stay here for just a moment, and Tiffany's going to dive in.
Thank you so much, Jay. That was some really great information. I feel like I know myself better after this hour. And as Dr. Jay said, we will be, you'll see I have a short survey right after this if you want to be contacted with more information about not only DISC, but any of our other leadership and development courses. So thank you all for joining, and you should receive a copy of this recording in your email. And Natalie, I promise to look into what is going on with you not receiving those. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all.